Man, I bless us for that. You got to be godlike to be able to do things like that. And that's what we're doing, brother.
I love that. I love that.
Own your greatness. Know your greatness. Know where you come from. Don't let anybody make you feel anything less, no matter what. But first, you have to look in the mirror and forgive yourself.
That's right.
For your transgressions. I got history, my brother Caleb. Okay, we all have history. I have history. I grew up in a project. I was exposed to everything that people are exposed to in a project. So I got history. I wasn't born like this. I became like this through the process. What our ancestors call Khepra, the process of becoming.
Yes, sir.
Represented by the dung beetle.
Yep.
Okay, the dung beetle who lives on dung, okay, and lays her eggs in dung. And she rolls that dung in sunlight along the waters of Hapi, or the Nile River.
Yes, sir.
And as the eggs become mature, the baby dung beetles eat through the dung till the light of day.
Wow.
Okay, and that was a metaphor for us. Because how many times you hear us say, "Oh man, don't make me eat that shit."
Wow.
They're always making me eat shit. But that's the process of becoming. Because Dr. King said, we in Atlanta, praise to the elder Dr. Martin Luther King ancestor.
Yes, sir.
I've heard him say that your character is built during times of conflict and conflict and controversy, not during times of comfort and convenience. And so if we as a people, as our ancestors did, bless the winds that brought the conflict to us, we'd understand that every time we have to go through shit, we're building our character.
That's right.
And that way you're looking at the problems or the challenges of life differently. You're finding a way to overcome them as opposed to cursing them for coming your way. Why me? Well, why not you? You bold enough to handle it.
That's right.
And to whom much is given, much is expected.
Yes, sir.
That's us, brother.
Amen.
Own it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oscarville, being there, what did you feel being around Lake Lanier? Being around the water, seeing it move, blue jays are flying around, cardinals. What did you feel from that? Oh,
bruh. I remember when we were filming, Brother Amadeus Christ.
Yes, sir.
You know, the brother that's brought us out of darkness and heavy as the crown.
Right.
Haruna set, filming. And we started setting up. They were showing me where to stand because of the sunlight, was coming through. The sun was coming across. And everything was good, and we started filming. I've got this up on my Instagram page. All of a sudden, and see what I did is I dipped the water, I dipped my bottle. See, because when we do libation,
yes, sir,
we pour the waters in order to bring our ancestors into what we're doing. It is an African tradition. Well, like, a lot of brothers, they be getting that wine, they go out there and then they drop a little bit for the homies.
Yeah.
Okay. That's libation. That's an African tradition for the ones that are not here.
Wow.
Okay. Thanking them for what they went through here. We're going to drink for you, but we're going to give you a little taste while we're at it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Well, libation is the same thing, but it's on a level of the ancestors coming forward. Because it is believed that if you set out on a venture or an activity and you don't include your ancestors, you're acting alone. So the idea of calling forward your ancestors, that's why the book on Professor William Leo Hansberry, I titled it An Intellectual Libation for the Architect of America's African Studies Program.
Yes, sir.
It's before I started my book writing. I paid homage. That's libation. That's a literary libation.
Yes, sir.
What we did yesterday in terms of Oscarville and Lake Lanier, paying respect to the brothers and sisters, William Anderson, who was putting together a phenomenal motion picture called Lake Lanier.
Right.
Talking about what we talked about yesterday.
Yes, sir.
I'm from the Bronx, brother. We don't have cardinals in the Bronx.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
We have water, but in the Bronx, I don't know of any real lakes, so to speak. We have water. We have things we call lakes. I understand. But it's not like where we were.
Come on.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
And so we set up. We started doing our thing. And then as I was doing the libation, because the entire presentation I'm doing in Lake Lanier is a libation. And so I thought it would be interesting if I should take the waters of Lake Lanier where our ancestors were drowned. If I took those waters, I wanted to bring them back on the land to protect us, to guide us. So it was a metaphor for bringing our ancestors back onto the land. Okay, they drowned them, but now we're going to bring you back onto the land.
That's right.
And so I started to do libation. And then all of a sudden, the waters, like it was almost like waves of water were coming and crashing against where we were.
Wow.
And there was nothing that we saw that would have made that happen.
That's right.
Now, I don't want to take nobody to the Twilight Zone. And I'm not trying to go in that direction.
Right.
But it was very interesting. And if you go to my IG page, you'll see what I'm talking about. When we started, those waves were not coming.
Yeah.
Then they started coming. And it lasted for, I would say, maybe a minute, minute and a half.
Yeah.
And then no more. It was almost like they were welcoming us. And, you know, when I told people what we were going to do back, you know, in New York, there was some that really were very excited about what's happening. But there was some that say, man, aren't you afraid? Because, you know, of the story of Lake Lanier, that you have hundreds of people over the years who have drowned or never returned.
Yes, sir.
There have been stories of women in canoes that people have seen, you know, and Lake Lanier, the movie, going to talk about that.
Right.
That's the movie that's going to show this kind of thing.
Right.
But actually, what the production company is doing, the team that's bringing this movie together, and what was interesting is yesterday was the first day of spring.
Yes, it was. It was.
What was interesting is that also was the last day they were filming that movie. What's interesting is they had no idea I was coming here. I had no idea that they'd be filming there. So we got some chance to talk to the brother that is producing this film and who is the writer of the film.
Wow.
There were so many stars that crossed yesterday.
Yes.
And then to see that water rippling through, coming through on waves, it was like clapping, thanking us for bringing them back.
Yeah.
And that was the purpose. I want our people to understand our ancestors and who our ancestors are, and that we are our ancestors.
That's right.
And what happened to our brothers and sisters, our family in Oscarville. Ma'at is a principle in Kush Kemet. Some people call it Egypt. I call it Kush Kemet. Ma'at. Ma'at is represented by an ostrich feather. And the ostrich is the largest bird on the planet, and it's the only bird that can't fly. Okay? It's the fastest bird on the planet, and some people say the fastest entity on the planet. Some people say, well, what about the penguin? Well, at one time, penguins could fly. Ostrich is the only bird that can't fly, yet it's a bird. Ma'at is represented by the feather of the ostrich. And it has basic characteristics and principles: truth, justice, morality, balance, harmony, order, arrangement. But my favorite characteristic is reciprocity. Okay? Reciprocity would hold everybody accountable and would make us all think as to how we're acting, how we treat each other. It says, you shall reap what you sow. One of the principles of the cosmic universe is that you shall reap what you sow. That's what Dr. King meant when he said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, which is one of the characteristics of Ma'at.
Yes, sir.
You shall reap what you sow. And I often wonder, us as a human family, not just black folk, but as a human family, if we were to think about who we are as a people and what it is that we're doing, would we conduct ourselves the way we're conducting ourselves? And if you knew that your actions would bring forward sevenfold what you're doing, if you knew that if you mistreated somebody, they would come back on you sevenfold, the question is, would you be willing to do that to somebody? Just like if you knew that if you did something good for somebody, it would come back to you sevenfold. Would you do that?
That's right.
The Indo-European has conducted themselves in a very evil way on this planet. There's a lot of ways that we could say that, right?
Yeah.
But let's keep it so that we can keep the emotion out and the analysis in. Because Dr. Leonard Jeffries, great scholar, always say, get the paralysis out the analysis. Okay? You shall reap what you sow.
That's right.
And what they did to the brothers and sisters of Oscarville, who right after the right after what we would call the Emancipation, 1865, went into the Reconstruction period where black folk were really getting themselves together. They built this thriving community. Before the beginning began, African folk in that area of what we call Georgia, they built banks and businesses. They built a civilization amongst themselves. And the Europeans were jealous. See, all this stuff about what they say about us, we have had so many great examples from Black Wall Street to Oscarville, all around the country, Arkansas. Black folk were getting themselves together. California. Okay, we're just coming from California doing a documentary there. Black folk were doing things. In fact, they founded, but they were from Mexico. Okay, Pio Pico. Okay, the last governor of California founded these concepts before the Europeans came in and took California from them. Okay. All these great things we tried to do and build a city, and every time we tried, they would knock us down in whatever way they could. They took that dam and they flooded this city to hide the sins that they had done. And there are over 20 cemeteries under that water. There are banks, there are businesses, and there are people. And they stole that land from black folk. And they built a dam, and then they also, in the surrounding area, they stole it, and they started to do their business. You shall reap what you sow.
Yes, sir.
And that's that movie, Lanier. When I was attracted to it, Haruna said, yo, Dad, did you check this out? and when I looked at it, I said, wow, this is some powerful stuff.
Yes, sir.
Because I knew the stories. I knew Black Wall Street, but I had never seen a visual story about something like this, a horror film. To us, it's a liberation film. But when some people see it, they're going to get headache.
That's right.
Because they're going to know you shall reap what you sow. And what I tell people, we're going to get reparations. We're going to get it. The question is not if, the question is when. And the longer you take to pay that reparations, the higher the price is going to be. It may not be you. It may not be your children or your grandchildren. It may be your great-great-grandchildren. And if you put off repairing what you've done, your great-great-grandchildren are going to curse your name for not solving the problem when you could. This problem should have, first of all, it shouldn't have even happened. And they shouldn't have stole African people, and they shouldn't have stole the land from the indigenous, if I may call them, African people. But they did. Okay, fine. You enslaved them. You stole the land. You put indigenous people on reservations or on their homelands, okay? The worst of the homelands, and you stole the best of the homeland. Okay, you did that. Horrible. But you had, I'm speaking to Indo-Europeans now, particularly Europeans, you had many times in history where you could have corrected your error. First of all, 1865. You could have given the brother 40 acres and a mule.
That's right.
But you didn't do it. Another mistake. Then you had the civil rights movement. You could have solved your problem then, but you didn't. And every time you didn't pay, the price got higher. And the price is going to continue to get higher. And if Europeans think that they're not going to pay reparations, they have another thing coming. You're going to pay reparations. One of your generations is going to pay reparations. I pray it's not off your hide. There's a price to be paid for the purposeful underdevelopment of a people. When I'm driving in New York, a lot of times I go hunt 25th Street, the mecca of the African-American experience in New York. I see brothers and sisters nodding out on the corner, okay? They wait for the light to turn red on the Bruckner Boulevard and come and ask, can you give me some money? There's no human being should ever have to do that.
Right.
When we were in Los Angeles, I was watching people living in tents on the street.
Yeah. Skid Row, things like that. Yeah.
Humans should not be that way. And I don't care. This goes back to priorities. I don't care how much money we have. if you're looking at your brother and sister like that, and I'm not even talking about black folk, because I'm going to look out for black folk. Any folk should not have to live like that, no matter what your culture is. No human being should be denied the basic things in life. When we were in Africa, we never had to worry about eating. We never had to worry about clothes on our back, shelter over our head, and safety of ourselves and our children and family. We didn't worry about that because the community was together. So, and we even do it today in the South. This is what has been one of our blessings. Grandma was like Jesus. It took 3 fish and 2 loaves of bread and fed the whole stadium. That's right. Grandma's hands did that.
That's right.
That's a reality that we did.
That's right.
And that's the history that we come from. And so Oscarville is meant to remind us. I pay homage to the ancestors. And I just thank them for all they did to get me here. That I could sit with good folk like y'all.
Likewise. And
have this kind of conversation. They did that. Because if they had decided to give up, if they had decided to think that they couldn't do it no more, we wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have that microphone, camera, or this wonderful building to have this conversation in.
That's right.
But because of them, we are here. We must pay homage to them and promise them we're going to continue. Because if they could do that then, we can do this now. I ain't just giving up. I'm going to keep on keeping on because it ain't over till we win.
That's right.
That's about, and after we win, see, people say, well, what you going to do after you win? What else is there? Well, my winning is just getting back to where we were before we were so rudely interrupted by these Indo-Europeans. Now we begin the life. Now we begin on the same journey our ancestors were on in the perfection of the human being, because we are now transforming ourselves from Homo sapiens sapiens to Super sapiens.
That's right.
And if you don't believe me, check out Dragon Ball Z. They stole our story.
Super Saiyan.
Super Saiyan. That's what they're talking about.
Wow.
They're talking about those pyramid builders, and they're talking about the temple builders. They're talking about those Africans that had raised themselves up out of the Homo sapiens sapiens stage onto a level of what we call intuitive instinct, which is cosmic consciousness, which is one of the higher forms of being a masterpiece on the planet.
Yes, sir.
They came and they rudely interrupted us when we were on that journey. So after we win, we got to get back on that journey to continue what is called the road to Super Sapiens or Homo Perfectus. That's us.
That's heavy. Cosmic consciousness, right? When we read things like a Shabaka Stone, how did you feel of learning about how our people could go back 2,500 years and study something and try to just rebuild that?
Brother,
how was that?
It was, well, I was first introduced to Shabaka Stone.
Right.
My mother. My mother was a secretary in an oil company, a major oil company in New York. And because of the nature of the size of the building, they had a Xerox department where when the lawyers and other people would be making copies, they just did not go to the other room and make copies. There were so many things being done in that building that they had a whole Xerox area where they would bring whatever needed to be copied and then brought back up to whatever department they were in.
Right.
And I was writing a novel on Ethiopia. And my mother used to make copies for me because everybody in the Xerox room was black. Okay, so my mother had a relationship with all these younger brothers and sisters.
Yes, sir.
And my mother would bring my work in to be copied. And one day, the brother said to my mother, Miss Coleman, you said this, your son wrote this? He said, yeah, my son wrote this. And he said, if your son wrote this, he definitely would be interested in this.
Wow.
And he gave her a copy of Stolen Legacy. This is back 1976, 1977.
Wow.
This was before Stolen Legacy by Dr. George G.M. James was republished, because it was on the underground. That's how we got our work, is the underground. Wow. In the Xerox companies of big oil companies or in industrial complexes, the Xerox would take an Albert Churchward book or a Gerald Massey, Natural Genesis, and make copies and then give it to the community. This is how I got a hold of George G.M. James's Stolen Legacy. So my mother brought it home. She said, yo, Skip, this is my nickname, Skip, if, they said you'd like this, check it out. And so I started reading Stolen Legacy, about how the Greeks stole our legacy. And I was just getting into it. Then I got to chapter 8, page 139 to 151. That dealt with the Memphite text, the Memphite theology that was rewritten on stone, called the Shabaka Stone. And man, I read that, brother, and that just, because I was interested in astronomy.
Yeah.
But when I read that, man, that just blew my mind. I said, I'm going to write a book one day about this, because folk got to understand because George G.M. James is deep. He was a philosopher. He was a linguist. He's deep. You got to read Stolen Legacy a couple times. I used to drive up to the college I taught in on Saturdays, and we would, like the fraternities and sororities, the brothers and sisters asked me if I would teach them about Stolen Legacy, because some of them had heard about it. Some of them had read it, but it was heavy. Okay. And so I would come up and I would do a chapter a week on Stolen Legacy for those that wanted to learn it, because it's a heavy book.
Right.
And I said, wow, but you know something? This has to be broken down for the community to understand.
Right.
And so I promised myself back in 1977, I was going to write a book. But there was a lot more I had to learn. And so as I began to understand this, I started reading great scientific scholars. I started to read a lot of the astrophysicists of today.
Wow.
Much respect to Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah.
And to Carl Sagan, Stephen Hawkins. I can go through all of the peoples of European descent. Later on, I would read Stefan Alexander, who's a brother, read the work of other scholars. And I began to see that there was a comparative analysis between Shabaka Stone and today's astrophysics.
Yeah.
And I also began to realize that the Shabaka Stone could answer questions that today's astrophysicists could not. And so I said it was about time. But before I did that, I said I have to write another book to get them ready for this, because folk not going to be ready for Shabaka Stone. So then I wrote Spirituality Before Religion.
Right.
Because that's what lays the groundwork for a fundamental understanding of the greatness of our African ancestors, who were so deep. And Shabaka Stone is a stone that was written somewhere around 710 years before the Common Era, before the Christian era, if you want to say it like that. But Shabaka says in the first two lines that's horizontal, that he came upon this worm-eaten document, but that it was so important to pay homage to his ancestors that he had his scientists rewrite it, but this time in stone, so that it would never be destroyed like the original document. Many say that it was written on leather. Now, I'm going to stick a pin in this story and take you back, because as I was writing my books, particularly Shabaka Stone for Children, which is visual. You see, it's not like the script of Shabaka Stone that would be more for adults. It's the visual story of Shabaka Stone, because I want the children to understand what's going on. And I carved in leather. There was a Panamanian brother that I knew named Josh Perrier. He worked for Tandy Leather. He taught me how to carve on leather.
Wow.
So my artistic contribution is on leather. I carve on leather like our ancestors carved on stone.
Wow.
So I said, isn't it interesting if I should realize that if it was carved on leather and it was worm-eaten and Shabaka rewrote it on stone, I'm going to take Shabaka Stone and I'm going to carve it on leather. So it's full cycle.
That's right.
Okay, well, go around, come around.
That's right.
And so just as Shabaka honored his ancestors, I am honoring Shabaka, who is honoring the ancestors.
That's right.
Now check this out. If you looked at the date when the Memphite theology probably was written to when Shabaka rewrote it in 710, and if you should take when Shabaka rewrote it in 710 and come up to March 21st, 2023, okay? Shabaka is here. When it was written is here.
Yeah.
Shabaka is here. and March 21st, 2023 is here. More time elapsed
Further back, yeah.
between when it was written and Shabaka rewrote it than when Shabaka rewrote it and today. That's how ancient the ancestors were. The ancestors were more ancient to Shabaka than Shabaka is to us.
Wow.
That's how deep this is. This genius of cosmic realities. And when you follow the story, in fact, there's a brilliant brother from the Ngala people, Nigeria. His name is Dr. Gabriel Oyibo, who was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Math.
Wow.
He and I are friends. He came upon my work, but we didn't come upon the work this way. I had a friend that was at a dinner party where Gabriel Oyibo was. And Gabriel Oyibo at the dinner party was talking to people about how his people, the Ngala people, traced their people back to Kush Kemet. That Nigeria, Orishas, the concept of the very culture of his people, Ngala, are related to the Gala people of the Nile Valley, or the Happy Valley. So my friend came to me, my good brother, Winston Collymore. He came to me and said, yo, you wouldn't believe who I met at this party. There's a brother, all this talk you doing about the connections between West and East Africa, this brother's from the Ngala people, he's tracing back and talking about this. I said, well, what is his name? And he said, Dr. Gabriel Oyibo. And I was doing a workshop series in the district where I was in the Bronx. And so I invited Dr. Oyibo to come and do a 2-part series on the relationship between West Africa and East Africa. There was a sister in the audience who was from Nigeria. She attended this presentation. And as Dr. Oyibo was talking about this, she started singing a song in Yoruba that talked about coming from the great waters of the East. She started singing as he was talking.
Wow.
And he looked at her, and he started singing it.
It was familiar, yeah.
So that they grew up with stories about where they came from. And that is what confirmed for me what this was. Phenomenal. However, Dr. Oyibo had written a book. And he started talking about turbulence in astrophysics and what turbulence was. And I had been doing the groundwork for Shabaka Stone and all of that. There is a characteristic in Shabaka Stone that represents something in astrophysics, and it means that when some turbulence, you know, when you're there, it means you hit an air pocket. There's a wave. There's a direct ray that comes down from the sun to the earth. However, it's interrupted every so often. There are light, heat, and sound particles that come down straight from the sun to the earth. However, it's interrupted by turbulence, and so it curves, and so it becomes a wave. Okay. And he began talking on a physics level.
Right.
He had moved away from the West-East African connection, started talking about his book. And I was filming him. And then all of a sudden I had to move away from the camera, check this brother out, become a student in the room, because I was saying, wait a minute, that's a Shabaka Stone. But he's talking about Shabaka Stone.
Wow.
And afterwards, and now, mind you, I didn't know anything about Dr. Oyibo as it relates to this. I just knew that he talked about West and East African connections. I brought him up to do this. But this brother started dropping his knowledge on astrophysics, where he has created mathematical formulas. And then I say to him, you know, when you were talking about that, there's a stone in Africa that's called Shabaka Stone. And I tell him, you know, I'm doing work on the grand unified theory, which is the last theory that Albert Einstein was working on, where he was trying to unite the outer world with the inner world, okay? The sun, okay? And planets revolve around the sun. That's the outer world. And then when you get into the inner world, quantum physics, on the inside of your body, you have an atom. You have a nucleus, a proton and a neutron, and then you have electron that circles around that. And what the astrophysicists were saying back in the day, through Albert Einstein, when he wrote the general and special law of relativity that deals with the outer world, and then you have Max Planck in the 1800s who had written the concept of the inner world, or what we call quantum mechanics. Now Albert Einstein and other physicists were trying to say, well, if there is a law, formulas that deal with the rotation of planets around the sun, and there are formulas that deal with the electron rotating around the nucleus of a cell, is there one formula that unites them both, and as above, so below?
Right.
Okay, I was working on that concept. Okay, and I told Dr. Yibo, I said, that sounds like Shabaka Stone. And doctor, I've been working on this concept of the grand unified theory. He said, hold on, that's my next book.
Wow.
I'm writing a book on Gagut, G-A-G-U-T, God Almighty Grand Unified Theory. In fact, he called it a theorem because he said he could prove it. So, right after Dr. Clark joined the Ancestors in '98, I started doing a series of workshops and interviews like this. There's a brother, phenomenal brother named Reverend Clemson Brown. Reverend Brown said, listen, I'd like to get you two on tape. And so what he did is, he said, how can we do it? I said, well, what we can do is I'll invite him to my resource center, and we'll sit down and we'll talk, and you can film us. On YouTube, there's this YouTube. It's Dr. Gabriel Yibo and Booker T. Coleman Jr., because that was before I was Kaba, doing a comparative analysis of the Grand Unified Theory, or Gagut, and Shabaka Stone. That has gone all around the world. In Nigeria, because he's from Nigeria, I've got Nigerian folk that are on my sites now. Wow. Because of my relationship. In London, when they brought me to London, many of the brothers and sisters from Nigeria were very proud of Dr. Oyibo's accomplishments, and so they saw Gagut. They saw our interview, where I am taking every one of his symbols, every one of his concepts in his theory. I'm taking them and I'm placing them in Shabaka Stone. Wow. As he's talking, because he talks 20 minutes, I talk 20 minutes. He talks 20 minutes, I talk. Because we didn't want to go back and forth because it might have been confusing. So he set up his formulas with all of his representations, all of his concepts, all of his symbols of what Gagut is. And then I would stand up and I would do all of the principles of Shabaka Stone. And then he'd come back and he would then start talking about the comparative relationship. And then I came back to do the comparative analysis between what he was saying in physics and what Shabaka Stone was saying. And here's what we came to, and it's something that Dr. George G.M. James came up to. The ancient Kush Kemet scholars knew more than scientists of today. Wow. And the reason why is because Western civilization never understood science and spirituality. That's right. Africans understood that science and spirituality was two sides of the same hide, two sides of the same coin. If I showed you a piece of material and it was suede on one side, I wouldn't have to ask you if the other side was leather. Because the other side of suede is leather, the other side of leather is suede. If I showed you a coin and it had a head, I wouldn't have to ask you, do you think the other side is a tail? And that's the same thing with spirituality and science. That's why the subtitle of my book, Spirituality Before Religions, is Spirituality is Unseen Science, and Science is Seen Spirituality. Shabaka Stone will blow your mind. It will answer the questions in life. And that's why Neset Biti, or Pharaoh Shabaka, said it was such an important document that he had to rewrite it. And that's what he did. And he updated it with the knowledge that the Kush Kemet scientists had come to since it was last written. Wow. And what I did in my book is I updated Shabaka Stone from the current information that is today. What goes around comes around.
That's right.
Reciprocity.
That's it.
And that's where we have to come from as a people.
Yeah.
And I tell people, and I believe that the books that I tell people I don't write books because I'm a writer. I write books because I got something to say.
That's right.
I just don't write books because that's my occupation. Because right now what I'm doing, I believe I'm much better equipped to talk than write. So I don't look at writing, so to speak, as a career. I look at this more like a career. Because my mind functions better from my mind through my tongue. Some people's is better at writing, so the relationship is the mind to the hand, or however you present it.
Right.
I do both, but I believe I'm more comfortable when I'm doing this because my thoughts flow and people say, brother, can you repeat what you just said? And I said, what I just say?
You flowing.
Because I'm constantly moving forward with my thoughts.
That's right.
So it's hard for me to recall. I said, well, give me an idea of what I said. And then I can go back and maybe rephrase it another way. I'll never say it the same way again.
That's right.
It's like a jazz improvisation.
Yeah.
Okay, I never say the same thing.
That's right.
But what I'm talking to you about, I've said this so many different times, but the way I'm saying it to you now is different from any other time I've ever said it.
That's right.
Because that's how my mind functions. But Shabaka Stone is a very important book, and I felt that it was just too important not to do it for the children. So I had to write Shabaka Stone for children.
Right.